Okay. So for people rolling in here casually, we are initiating our Shade Lighting 2 live stream for week 2. Just gonna give everybody a couple minutes here to start rolling in. It's only a couple minutes past 8 on the East Coast. But just want to let people roll in. I want to make sure my YouTube stream is buffering properly. So in just a little bit here, we'll kind of get with the goods. But it does look like it's all working. All right. So for anyone that's feel free to say hi, let us know you're alive and doing well. So yeah, let's jump in here and see what we want to talk about. We'll pull this up. So week 2 is I think it's a really fun week in this class because we're finally getting back into some texturing. So the whole texturing process is pretty cool. Hey Annie, welcome to the stream. But the texturing process is going to be really cool because it starts combining some things that you guys have learned previously with Photoshop, and we're going to be beginning to integrate that into all the different things that you guys have learned about with Maya and RenderBand. I think it's really one of the first times so far that you guys have gone through. You're starting to see a lot of like overlap between these the different parts of the production pipeline. So a lot of cool stuff here, and I think one of the challenges with the Photoshop activity for a lot of people is it really comes down to your comfort level with Photoshop, because we're not really spending a whole lot of time going through all these different tips and techniques. I do have quite a bit in the videos, and there are numerous ways to do these activities with other ways that I'm not going over. But the main goal here with 2.2 and 2.3 is I really just want you guys to see how UVs work. So how we can use UVs to guide us through the texturing process. We're going to cover that a little bit today. We're going to be making some different tileable textures, and then hopefully by the end, I'm hoping we still have time to get into a bit more advanced work with layering using masks. And I was actually just talking to my Shading and Lighting 1 group about this in the previous live session, as we were talking about Painter for a little bit, and how awesome Painter is just because of how it uses masks to layer all these different textures and materials together. So masking, if you're not really familiar with masking, it's probably, to me, one of the single most powerful things you can do in any of these softwares. What masking basically comes down to is, do you understand what a black and white alpha is, and how can we use that to control how layers stack together? So for any of you that are maybe still relatively new to Photoshop, or just had used it maybe in Digital Painting 1, masking might still be a fairly new concept for you. You've probably seen it, but maybe not really used it very much. So I really want to spend a little bit of time near the end explaining how this stuff works. And then hopefully at the end, we'll probably do normal maps. Well, I might skip the normal maps part actually, but by the end of this whole week, I do want to show you what you're going to be producing. So you're building off what you had in 2.1, which was the like the wood, the metal hinges and all that stuff, the telescope, and we're getting into these other materials for the balcony, the post. We'll talk about how we can color correct some of the different pieces of the post, do like a painted effect, putting textures in the pedestal, and really the big one here that takes up easily like almost half the frame is the wall. So this one's going to be really important. The balcony is also important too, because they just take up so much visual real estate. And once you get through this week, you can tell there's not really a whole lot left. We're just down to adding a few lights. We'll talk about glass. Glass is really fun to create. And we'll do some candles, some transmissive surfaces like light that goes through a candle wax that kind of lights up the inside. So it's also called subsurface scattering. That's all going to be in week 3. But let's just dive in here and do it. It's going to be pretty fun. So I've got my project on my desktop right now. I know you guys probably have it in your documents folder because you're all organized, keeping your project set up per class. I just have mine on the desktop right now because I already have the final project in my documents folder. I don't really want to get any of this stuff mixed up with my final version. So this is a duplicate. But we're inside of Maya, and then what I'm going to do is immediately set the project. Excuse me. So we're going to go to the Open menu, hit Set Project down here. Let's go to the desktop for me, and there it is. So we're going to hit Set, go into Scenes, and you have to kind of pardon me for this a little bit, but I'm using the original file, so I don't have this with like the telescope and the doors and hinges and all that stuff set up. Not too worried about it. Usually everyone does pretty well at that anyway, so we're gonna imagine that those parts are finished. We're going to use our imagination to sort of envision all the amazing work that we clearly didn't do. But the first thing we're going to look into is how we could texture these guys right here. So the main difference is if when you kind of think back to let's talk about the telescope. This is a pretty interesting one. I'm going to go up here to UV and go to the UV editor, and we're going to open this up for a quick sec. And I need to kind of move some things around so you can see this. All right, let's try to do this. Let's close out of this for a second. So this is just a simple little cylindrical shape. I'm just going to move it out so you can see it. It's got a thickness to it. There's like a little bit of a lip. It goes inside. There's two sides to the cylinder, but this is one of the pieces that makes up the telescope. And you can see how if I just hold my right mouse button down in the UV editor and go to Shell Selections, you actually can see the different parts. This is the outside, this is the inside. So I've kind of made this as a terrible analogy or comparison, but it is sort of like reverse origami, where you're really just taking a 3D shape and trying to find a way to break that into 2D flat pieces of paper. That's basically what UV mapping is. And I've done a lot of this work for you. So you're not doing much UV mapping. You just have to know how to use this stuff. But the thing here with the telescope is that you didn't have to worry about the UVs. Like everything was just kind of done. Like they all sort of had their own little UV layout provided for you. And when you went online to find a texture, there wasn't really a whole lot you had to do with it. You might have had to clean up a couple texture seams or something like that, but really the whole texture was just like a giant, chunk of wood or some wooden boards, or even with the balcony, it's just a giant piece of stone, and you just throw it on the material and cross your fingers and hope it all works out. What is going to be different here with this guy is we are actually going to use the UVs to put textures in very specific locations. So it's not always about just find an image and throw it on there. Sometimes you do want to play around with the placement of the texture and think about, well, on the pedestal, if I wanted this to be marble and that to be, I don't know, like a granite, how do I do that? Do I have to have this be a separate material? I mean, because if you look at the UVs, the way this is broken up, as long as in Photoshop, if you imagine this square right here, pretend this is your Photoshop canvas. If you think of if you knew in Photoshop that this piece right here, the long cylindrical part of the pedestal, if I put a texture here only, it will only appear in that part of the model. If I put different textures here, it will only appear on those parts of the model. So it really just comes down to knowing your UV layout and then using that inside of Photoshop. So the next question is, well, how the heck do we do that? I will show you. We're going to grab all the pieces we need. Now you'll notice that one pedestal is really just this top part. And the reason it's set up like that is because I have both sharing the same 0 to 1 space. So all those 6 pieces total, but all 6 of those pieces between the two different pedestals all make this up. And it's broken up into a bunch of smaller pieces. You can see it's like this little cap. I think that might be the bottom of this cylindrical piece maybe, or the top of that little guy there. But they're all making up different sections of this whole thing. You can go to Shell and just move your mouse over it. If you go to Wireframe 2, you actually can see it a little bit better. Here's Wireframe. Oh, that's the other side. Sorry, this is all just on the left. So there's all the little pieces. We want to get this information out of Maya. So to do that, be careful because you don't want to try saving out the group. So for example, like if I click on this, you can see actually there's the group right there. Uh, Saving out UV snapshots doesn't work with a group. You have to have objects selected. So I can't click on this. I have to do the individual pieces. So we're going to click, hold shift, click through all those, hold shift, click through all that. Now, once I have everything selected, at the top of the UV editor, and I'm getting the UV editor, by the way, right here. There's also a custom workspace right here that will also pop it up. It looks a little bit different doing it that way through the workspace, but it's all the same thing. When this pops up, once you have it all selected, you're going to go to the top. Yours actually might look like this. Sorry if you haven't been in here before. I had the shaded button turned on, but you might see something that looks closer to that. Either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. What you want to do is hit that little camera guy right there, and that's going to make the UV snapshot. So we're going to hit that button. You're going to see a new little thing is going to pop up, and it's asking you basically where do you want to save this information. Now, it's not saving the 3D model. This is saving, it's literally an image of this. We're going to use it as a guide. So over here, we're going to come to the file name, hit browse, and I'm going to put it in the project. Now, because mine's in the desktop, we're going to go over here. We're going to go in source images, and we're going to do something crazy here. We're going to organize all of our textures in folders. So rather than having just, dozens of textures randomly named, from whatever they were called when you downloaded them, we want to start organizing this into other folders so we know that all the pedestal textures are in one area, all the balcony textures are in another folder. It's just and you might have reference images in there too. It's just we want to think about long term, how could we better prepare this project so it doesn't get kind of just unorganized and crazy. So when I have this thing open, you could go in the folder in your browser and explore and do it. I just think we can do it from right here because there is a button at the top where we can do create new folder. And now I'm going to do pedestal. We'll call it pedestal underscore textures. And so I'm going to go in the pedestal textures folder, and we're going to come down here and type in, this is going to be pedestal underscore UV. So this is usually what I use anytime I save a UV snapshot. Whatever the object or material name is, underscore UV. Save. Okay, so now it's updated the location. We can choose the format. Now the format most of you guys will see is probably defaulting at Maya IFF, and that's still totally fine if you have it set to that or like a PNG. IFFs and PNGs have alphas. I don't personally mind if you do that, but I'm going to leave it as JPEG because I think this is a really good way to teach you guys about how blend modes work. So we're going to leave it as JPEG, which is just a standard red, green, blue image with terrible compression. And now we want to choose the resolution. Now this is something you'd probably determine if you know how big you need the texture to be. So in the documentation, I'm almost positive I say 2048, but I'm now starting to second guess myself. Yes, I do. So 2048. So we're going to leave this the same. If you notice yours is different, like 1024, it'll probably keep them both the same as long as that lock aspect ratio is turned on. But if it is different, I just make sure it's set to 2048 by 2048. Edge color, leave it to white. If this is set to a different color, it's going to look like a black image with whatever color wireframe you pick. I prefer to leave it as white. And the other thing down here for UV tiles, this is basically trying to figure out when you save the snapshot, what part of this sort of infinite grid of UVs is it trying to save? So when it says when it says U and V of 1 and 1, what it's talking about is this little region here. See how it's kind of like your typical graph or grid. You probably remember this from like actually some of your geometry classes. Excuse me. Like if you ever use those graphing calculators, do people even use graphing calculators anymore? Is that a thing? I am probably dating myself really badly here. I used graphing calculators. You probably did not, but we would kind of have this like a graph set up, which was also a 0 to 1 space coordinate system, and you'd type in like sine and cosine expressions and watch how that changed the curve. But this 0 to 1 section here of the UV editor is what this is defaulting to right here. Now, if you go to range, which I don't do a whole lot, but occasionally you might break up a more complicated object into like different coordinate systems. Like I could say, if for whatever reason the pedestal and all this stuff was combined, I could be like, here's the pedestal, here's the balcony railing, here's the archway, here's the, I don't know, the posts. Oh, you guys actually used them, of course, for geometry and trigonometry. Yeah, fantastic. I'm actually very relieved you guys told me you're using them because I was starting to feel ancient. Um, they really are turning into beams. If you ever buy your own graphing calculator, they're actually kind of fun because when you start figuring out how to use the different expressions and equations, you can start drawing different things with math. But we're going to have all this selected and just stick with standard one-to-one. And we're good. We've got location, res, range is perfect. Things are still selected. So it's going to save only what's selected. We're going to do apply and close. You'll see we have a little result, saved file. It tells you where it put it. Everything is very happy. We're going to close out of this for now. Okay. Now to double check what happened, if I go in the browser, or sorry, our Explorer, I'm still acting like this is a MacBook. Go into source images, go into pedestal, and this is what we saved. So this is the 2D image version of what our UV layout looks like. So it's not the fanciest looking thing, but it is very, very handy when you're doing stuff in Photoshop. Now, saving UV layouts isn't as critical when we start getting into 3D texturing softwares. And I was talking about this with the previous group, but when we were talking about Painter in my Shading and Lighting 1 live session, I kind of went off in this little tangent because I got excited talking about Painter. But Painter, while it does use UVs, it doesn't, you don't really need to save UV layouts like this. This is only used when you're in a 2D texturing software and you need a visual guide or reference so you understand where to put different parts of the texture. In something like Painter, which is you're painting literally on the 3D model, this doesn't really matter as much because you just, if you want to put concrete on the top of the pedestal, you just look at the top of the pedestal and start putting concrete on it. This is more of a 2D texturing thing we're doing. Hopefully that makes sense the way I'm explaining that. Let me know if you guys have questions about any of that stuff. We're going to dive into Photoshop. All right, Photoshop's loading up, going at a snail's pace. Are we good? We cool? We're good. All right, got some different things loaded up here. Awesome. Actually, I think some of these might be a couple of your projects now that I'm looking at it. So let's open this up. So what I'm going to do is back here, let's go back in that folder. And I'm just going to right click on this thing. And with Photoshop, I don't know why, I always tend to right click on the file and just choose to open with Photoshop. If you guys are doing it through File, Open Up Here, that's also fine. I'm not sure why I do it the other way with Photoshop. I think it's just a weird habit I've built up. Okay, so we're in Photoshop. Let's talk about some ways we can optimize this a little bit. I kind of go over this just a little in the videos, and I think I might talk about this even briefly in 2.1. But what I want you guys to do is immediately figure out which one of these two screen modes you prefer to use. So standard screen mode is our default. This is the one that has the different tabs. So if you have like multiple images open, they all appear up here and you can click between them. If you prefer to use screen mode or full screen mode with menu bar, you'll see this goes away, and I'll show you why this one's also kind of handy. We lose the top, but one thing I do like about full screen mode with menu bar is if I hold down my space bar, I don't know if did you guys learn about the space bar in Photoshop, like doing this? Whoa, that is really laggy. Holy Moses. I bet I'm having a graphics card issue. Let me try zooming in here. Oh boy, yep. We got some problems in Photoshop. I gotta look at my drivers. It's gonna look a little bit weird for me. I think I have a video card driver issue I need to look into with the software, but try not to mind that. But the main thing here with holding the spacebar down is it turns to a hand, and you can click and drag. and you can kind of move back and forth across the canvas. Mine's really laggy because I think I have a driver I have to update, or Photoshop needs to be updated. But I'm going to go here and double click on the layer. So I've zoomed in. I'm using Control minus, Control plus, just to zoom in and out. Okay. And we're going to double click on the background layer, and it's going to unlock it, and we get to name the layer to whatever we want. We're going to call this UV. Hit enter. Now, before I get too far with this, I'm immediately going to save this PSD document so we don't lose any information. So let's go to File, Save As, and I'm in the pedestals folder actually right now, which is great. So it already knows where to go. Let me just double check this is the right one. Is this the one on the desktop? It is. Perfect. So we're just going to call this pedestal. Save. Hit OK. I'm a little bit worried about this graphic card issue for this lecture, but we're going to just roll with it. Now what I'm going to do is hit F again to get out of this. I'm using F just to cycle through the screen modes. We're going to go online, and we're going to find some textures real quick. So I'm going to find two stone ones. I'm going to come down here and use Pexels. I'm sure a lot of you guys will end up using some of the same sites. You can use Google. They're all good. What do you guys want to do? I know Marble's always kind of fun. Yeah, there's some pretty funky ones in here too. We had, I think, one student use this before. That was an interesting one. I like that slate that looks as pavement. It looks like slate to me. That one's kind of cool. I like that one. Let's try using this guy. So I found one I think is kind of interesting. I might try this one out. Now, with Pexels, these are all free. I'm definitely going to go with the highest resolution possible to get more detail. We can always down-res it if we need to. So we're going to do free download. So say thanks to Ree. I am thanking you right now, Ree. You did wonderful. We love your photo. I promise I will donate to you at some other point. And we're going to X out of that. Okay. Let's look for, let's see here. Let's look for slate, see if anything pops up. I might get, oh, those are sponsored. These are all going to cost money, so we're not going to do that. I'm actually going to go back to see if I find sandstone. Oh, we're getting photos. You know what? Let's just do texture and see what we get here. If I type in texture, this one's going to be kind of interesting because texture is a really interesting keyword because this will sort of trigger a lot of image search engines to understand that you're looking for a 2D flat image. So that's a very handy one to use. And then we can find some ones that we think might work. Like this, even this one right here, I think is cool enough where we could get it to work. I think I used that in one of my videos actually. This one's a little bit chunky. I'm not too crazy about that. I might stick with the first one. That's kind of cool. Let's do this one. Is that water? That's water. Oh, that's not stone. Got all excited thinking this was some really cool like blue stone, and that's totally water. We'll go back up top. I'll play it safe, and we'll stick with this guy for now. All right, free download. Another one, Kira. We very much appreciate your hard work. All right, we'll close out of that. So we got some stuff. Now, what we want to do over here is bring these guys in. So currently mine are all in the downloads folder, and we really, again, want to keep this organized. So what I'd recommend we do is go to downloads. We have our two files. I'm going to click on these. I'm just using control to select them both. We're going to drag them over here. Now, if you wanted to, what was the other thing in there? Wait a minute. Oh, that's actually, Alex, that's your Maya file. I still have that downloaded. You're now famous and part of the video. So over here, I've got the two textures. You can totally leave them at the default name if you want. You could also rename them to something else like marble texture reference. You know, I don't know what that was, but you know, concrete texture reference. But either way, we're just going to shift click on both, right click, and let's open those with Photoshop. Oh, that's right. It doesn't work unless I do it individually. That's a little bit annoying. All right, so Photoshop, right click, open with Photoshop. So here we go. They're open. And what I'm going to do is get this into this document right here. So we're going to come over here. I'm going to do a Control A. I'm going to do a couple hotkeys in a row, by the way. So I'm going to do Control A, Control C, Control D. So you can hold down Control and just do A, C, D in sequence. That's select all, copy, deselect. So Control A, C, D. We're going to pop over here, Control V. We're going to paste it. Oh, this thing is massive. That's a big boy. So we're going to drag this below the UV layer because currently this is covering the UVs. So let's flip the layer, drag it down. Let's bring the other guy in here as well. Come over here, Control A, C, D. Pop back, Control V to paste. Now this one actually appeared below it because it's based on what my current selected layer was. But if it does appear above, just drag it below. You're good to go. All right, let's do Control Plus. We're going to zoom in just a little bit, and I'm just going to spacebar over here and back up a little bit so you can see this. So the first issue is how do we see through the UVs? So you could do this by definitely just pulling down the opacity, and you can kind of see through the layer to what's beneath it because we're trying to put these textures in very specific locations. But I want to show you guys how these blend modes work. We're going to pick a blend mode in this chunk, which are additive. What that's going to do is only show the white part. So the color white has a number. It's the number 1. Black is the number 0. And so if I put this thing to add, it hides the black because when you add 0, it doesn't do anything. So it makes the black transparent. But when it adds the number 1, which is the white part, the number 1 gets added to the texture below. It makes the texture brighter. And that's basically why we can see the white line still. So we're going to a linear dodge add on that. Screen's also pretty good. We're going to come down here, and I'm going to call this colored. I'm just going to call it colored concrete. This we're going to call dark marble. I don't know if that's actually what it is, but we're going to go with it. And I immediately want to mask out everything. So to mask this out, because I have all this empty space and it looks kind of messy, and this is still covering this guy. So we're going to click on here. Let me actually turn these off for a second so you can see just the UVs again. I'm going to go up here to the magic wand, which is also W. Oh, one thing too, by the way, I don't know if you guys have realized this, but if you go through these little tools, you know how back in digital painting you learned all these little hotkeys like G and B and W and M is marquee, and they're all different. S is your clone stamp, I believe. Yep. So when you do something like G, for example, which is gradient, but see how there's also like paint buckets and other things in here? So you might be wondering how to get to these other tools, because when you hit G again, it doesn't really do that. Like if I hit B to go to brush, like what if I want the pencil? That's also B. How are 4 tools all the same hotkey? So if you add shift to the hotkey, it'll cycle through the subtools. That's kind of fun. G, shift G, will go through all the subtools. But if we go to wand here, click in the empty space in that UV layer. And what it's going to do, based on your tolerance, is give you a selection of all the black. Make sure sample all layers is not turned on, by the way, but it'll select all the black. And what I'm going to do is go up to select, and I'm going to offset the selection by a few pixels so it's not literally up to the edge of the shell. I like to give it a little bit of a buffer, so if the texture gets cut off right there, because we don't want to have texture out here, I don't want whatever this color is on the outside. We might decide to leave it black or gray, but whatever that color is out here, I really want to make sure that's not bleeding into the edge of the UV shell, because we will definitely see that in Maya. So with the selection running, we're going to go to Modify, Contract. So this whole selection menu, when you go to modify, it's basically, think of this kind of like the free transform tool in Photoshop. You know how you've used like translate, rotate, scale, you've moved images around. You can basically do that with selections. You can move the selection, you can grow it, and contract it, you can soften the edge with a feather. We're going to do contract. And I'm going to do by 5 pixels, hit OK, and let me zoom in so you can see this. See how it basically offset it? So it's a little bit of a 5 pixel buffer. So now when I put a color out here to clean this whole thing up, there's no way it's going to go into the UV shell, and it's not going to show up in Maya. So this is kind of our safety buffer. All right, let's back up. Now, why did I do that? It's because if I go to the new layer, I just click anywhere below, make new layer, So it's an empty layer. I'm going to call this, let's call it mask underscore layer. Now, what we're going to do is this, with that selection running, I'm going to go in here, and on this layer, we are going to make our first mask, which is one of the big themes for the lecture today. So the mask button is right at the bottom of Photoshop, and it does something really interesting when you hit it while a selection is running. So if a selection's running, it will use this selection as your mask. So when I hit it, watch what happens on the layer. Notice how there's a little image that looks suspiciously similar to the UV layout. Now I want you to see what happens when I make a mask on a different layer. Actually, I'll do a new layer again. This time I'm not going to have anything running. Watch what happens when I do a mask without anything selected. Normally it's just white. This is your starting point for almost every mask. And white just means everything's visible, so nothing is really different. But because the selection's running, it says only what I selected is visible, and the chunk. I think we're back. Oh, are we back? I don't know if you guys can hear me again. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's annoying. I actually have that issue a lot with OBS. It's really frustrating for me because sometimes when I'm doing your video critiques, I'll record like 10 minutes into this critique and then I look back at OBS and the microphone has died and I lose everything. So that's annoying. I didn't realize it was going to happen during the stream. All right. So I don't know what you guys, what you missed, but basically I was talking about what's currently on the layer and why this mask isn't doing anything. And it's just because this layer is empty. There's nothing on it. So as soon as we put anything in the color, so this little part of the layer, this is RGB. I'll go to my paint bucket and we're going to pick, let's just do like a mid-tone gray. So right in the middle. We're going to paint bucket gray and watch what happens with the canvas. See how it looks like on the icon, gray should be everywhere, but because that mask was created earlier with that selection, it didn't put the paint in those areas. This basically is a stencil, is what we just did really quickly. Now the reason we're doing that is because now I don't really need this UV layer. I have a stencil set up, and as long as I know where to put these layers below it, we're going to be masking out the textures in the right spot. So it's pretty nice. So we're going to go over here. I'm going to make a group, we're going to call this colored concrete group. Let's do this again below this guy. Make a group. We'll call it dark marble group. And I'm going to put this in the group for there. We'll put this in the group for the dark marble. And for colored concrete, let's do... I'm going to do the colored concrete, I think, on the taller kind of cylindrical pieces. So we're going to do Control T. I want to back up so you can see this thing is huge. I'm going to center it somewhere around here. I don't just want to move it because the texture quality of that's pretty poor. But what I think I can do is if I use the free transform, grab a corner and scale it down, I can get a much higher res version of this, or a lot more texture detail and variation by shrinking it to fill. Something like this. And I'm not going to necessarily go all the way down. I kind of like having a little bit of variation where I maybe do something like this. Actually, let's do that. Okay, there's one. Now I'm going to duplicate it for over here. We're going to take this, drag it to the new layer, make a duplicate. This, we're going to hit V. We're going to move it over. And I'll maybe do this right here. So they're a little different because I kind of have the layer big enough where there's a little bit of overlap where I could kind of move it around and it's not going to get cut off. So we'll just drop that over there. We're basically doing the old school way that we would do textures pretty consistently about 5-10 years ago. So, but it's really good to know this because you're not always going to have Substance Painter at your fingertips. Photoshop is a classic software that you're just sort of expected to know. It's always good to know how to do this in our simpler fashion. So there we go. We're good. Now, there could be an issue where these do overlap with other shells. So I think what I'm going to do is intentionally make this a little more difficult. I'm actually going to flip this. So I get, maybe I want this here, but it's causing an overlap. We're just going to go with it for now, and I'll show you how to fix that in a second. Now the dark marble, let's turn that on. This one actually kind of looks cool the way it is, but we could do Control T if you want. You can scale it down a little bit. Sometimes you might get lucky and you just kind of like the way it looks at the full scale. But I'll bring mine down to maybe here. Actually, let's bring it down even a little more. I'm gonna do Shift, and I'm using the corner to make a snapped rotation. And we're just going to put that right there. Hit OK. We're going to drag it down to new layer, which makes a copy. We'll move it over here. We'll maybe do Control T. I'll turn it the other direction. I'll just kind of find like another spot I can pull from. Like that, they look different enough where I think it's going to work. All right, let's hit OK. Now you can see that we've masked everything off. And look what this looks like, by the way, if I turn this mask layer off. See how messy that is? Well, it's not messy, but that doesn't really look great. And it can get a lot worse too, by the way, if you start using your brush to like clone stamp and do other things in here. This texture could look like a disaster visually. Even though it might be totally fine in Maya, it's not the prettiest. But just by putting the mask layer on there, you are making something that looked really kind of sloppy into something that looks visually presentable for the final texture. Now, the one issue we're running into here is this little overlap. So the mask isn't going to know that we shouldn't have textures crossing over to other sections, but I want to show you how to fix it. The issue is that this group just happens, or one of the layers in the group just happens to be big enough where it's crossing into something we don't want. So how could we fix this? I'm going to throw something out here that's a huge shock. What if we used a mask? I know it sounds crazy, but we're going to do a mask again. So remember how when we do a mask that based on a selection, it will create the mask automatically of like where you want to see something? That's kind of what we did earlier. This time what I'm going to do is a little different. I'm going to make a mask on the group. So nothing's changed yet. And I'm going to sort of do the opposite where I'm going to paint where I don't want the texture. So currently, because it's white, it just thinks everything in the group is still visible. But you know how we don't want it right there? So if white is visible, what do you think would be not visible? Cue Jeopardy music. I really need to invest in like something. Oh, wait a minute. Hold please. This is so stupid. Yep, you got it, Alex. These stupid ads. Oh, they're ruining the moment for me. There we go. I just really wanted an excuse to play Jeopardy music. Oh my god. I've been at work way too long. Yes, so black. We're going to put black right here. I'm never getting that time back. What I'm going to do is just marquee drag over this part of the image. Yeah, exactly. So, right. So if you basically put black in this part of the mask, it'll totally get rid of the texture. So all I'm doing is using a little marquee and I'm just drawing over what I don't want. I'm selecting the mask. Let's go to paint bucket, flip it. So I'm going to paint black. I'm just going to click right there and watch the magic. Look at that. See the little black strip that popped up? We just masked that out. It's that easy. That's very true, Alex. If you had worded it in the phrase of a question, I think I'd be able to give you full credit. But unfortunately, the judges are pretty picky tonight, so you're in the negative. I've been actually watching a lot of Jeopardy recently. I don't know why. It's definitely not making me feel any smarter, but it's pretty fun. So this is it. This is the pedestal, and from there, you could save your PSD document again, and we just save the texture out. Uh, so if we go over here and do save as, what we're going to do is save it in this folder. We're going to change this to PNG, and I'm going to call this pedestal underscore texture. So we're saving our flattened PNG version of this right in that same folder. We're not changing the resolution. We're not doing anything crazy. It's really just saving it out. But you can see we have our UV snapshot in this folder. We have the PSD document, so we can always come back in your work and fix stuff it was broken. We got the reference images we used from Pexels, and I got the final 2D version. This is what's going to work inside of Maya. So actually, we can hook it up real quick. I'll show you how easy this is. This is actually getting into a little bit of 2.3, but that's all good. So we're going to build this from scratch. Now, before I had you guys using like the different presets as like a starting point, we're going to do a Pixar surface. So if you want, actually, I'm going to make a Pixar surface first and then assign it, because I think that's probably not the way most of you guys are doing it, but I really want you guys to see how to do it the other way. You know how with the preset browser, you were kind of going out of your way to select everything first, and then you do like import and assign to selected? I really don't want you thinking that's the only way to do something. So instead, what we're going to do is we're not going to have anything selected. I'm just going to make a material and then assign it to something after. So at the top, we have our little Pixar surface shader. We're going to right click. We're going to pick it. You can see it's popped up. Now, even if it pops up, let's say you clicked off and you're like, oh, well, where'd it go? How do I ever get that back? Because it is still in your file. We're going to go in the Hypershade, which is this little ball at the top. Let's open this up. And this is going to show you the list of all the materials currently in your scene. Now, depending on what you guys have done in 2.1, there could be quite a few in here. It's very easy to have duplicates. If you just start importing multiple stuff from the preset browser, you may not even realize you have copies of the same material in your scene. But currently, I don't really have much of anything. I have the default Pixar surface. This is what's on everything before we assign a new material. Then I have the new one, which is Pixar Surface 2. Now I'm going to rename this real quick. So I'm just going to click on it. You can see it brings back all the settings we saw before. So I'm just getting to my material. Oh, by the way, actually this is kind of cool. Remember back in the first month when I showed you guys that whole DAG objects only thing in the outliner, and you saw that giant list of stuff? You actually can find that in here. So you can look for your material if you turn that off in the outliner, and it'll show up in here. I don't really like doing it this way because this is still kind of a mess. But if you're naming your material, actually could be a good way to find it through a search. Let me show you that real quick. So let's say we're being a great student. We love to be organized, and we're going to rename it. So I'm going to click on it, go over here, and let's call this pedestal material. Okay. And if you were looking for this, let's just pretend the Hypershade didn't even exist. Like this was not created. In the outliner, if you turn this off and you search and you know you called it pedestal material, if I type in pedestal, look what happens. It filters out everything except for what's named pedestal, which conveniently are the objects we want to assign it to and the material. See how like naming things can be so important? Because now you have everything you need at your fingertips to get this thing assigned to the right pieces. And if you know you're using the phrase or the suffix material on all your materials, if it's like pedestal material, balcony material, wall material, this also means if you type in material, you will get a list of every material in your scene, and you get it in a list format as opposed to dealing with the Hypershade. I actually don't think I've mentioned that in any of my videos before, so you guys get a little bit of a little treat with that one. Let's close out of that, and we'll go back here. I don't know why I got so excited about that. That's actually not that big of a deal. The simplest things are amusing me today. So we're going to click on all those pieces again. So just hold Shift, click through all that. And what you want to do to assign it is once you have them selected, hold down your right mouse button on that material. Don't click on it because you're going to lose your selection. So just hold down right mouse and do assign material to selection. And that'll put that on everything. And a good way to verify it worked is if you just deselect everything. If you hold down your right mouse button on the material and do select objects with the material, you should see that all the things you assigned it to light up. I do that quite a bit when I'm trying to verify that something is assigned to the right pieces. That's my way to like just double check that, like, okay, so that does look like it's on everything, or maybe like I missed a post and like, oh crap, that might tell me that I did miss something. And then I might select that and assign the material to it if it was, I just misclicked it earlier for whatever reason. But we're gonna go over here and I'm gonna do a render, and we're gonna quickly get the texture file connected. So we'll look through render cam. We're gonna start this. Hopefully it can find the Pixar dome light. It should. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, we should be good. Okay, so I got the material. I'm just gonna verify it's working. Let's change this to a weird color to see if that updates. Oh, it did not change. Oh, there we go. Let's add some saturation. Oh, cool. So I can put it to the pink. It's actually kind of cool too. If you're in list mode, how can you find the materials? So you're saying kind of like I've got, where it's like this, like view as a list, because you should still see it. Like as long as they're named, you'll see it. If yours are saying like just like Pixar Surface, 3 through 12, if you have a bunch that aren't named, it's a little tricky because you have to kind of click through them and maybe do a right click and figure out what they're assigned to. But even in list format, you should be able to see the name. The other one here with the non-list format, view as icons, this still works. The problem is the icons have crashing issues that I've talked to some of you guys about. So this should still be fine. I think it's only weird if the icon size will change the size of the listed text, and that might change it. So yeah, it shouldn't really be any different, whether it's in list or icon. You're not really losing a whole lot because the icon's kind of useless anyway. So I don't mind losing that. If I'm maybe not explaining it right, or if I'm misunderstanding you, Andy, just let me know. But we know it definitely works. So I'm going to go to the connection next to color, and we're going to hit that button. It's going to bring up the create render node window, and we're going to pick a 2D file. Okay, so we're going to connect that. Now, as soon as I do that, you can see the purple goes away. Now the reason it did that is because by making a file node, if I go back to the material, see how that purple slider, the box at the top doesn't show up on my. Oh. Okay, sorry. So you're saying this whole thing is missing. Like you're not seeing any of this. You don't. It's not just the materials tab is there and you can't read it. Like you don't even see this whole thing. I'm just gonna wait a second to verify what you're talking about. At least I think it's what you're referring to. Because if that is what you're referring to, it is right there. Because I can delete this. Like this whole part of the Hypershade is collapsible. So if you close out of the browser, it might look like this, where you have nothing. But in Window, if you choose to look at the browser again, it'll pop up like a floating window, kind of like when you guys broke the interface before. You had like the channel box and stuff like hanging out, and you had to rearrange it. Hypershade's the same thing. You can create the browser, and then if you snap it near the top, it'll pop back into place again. So a lot of the stuff in Maya kind of works the same way. It's actually kind of good you brought that up though, because a lot of these other windows, if you they have like their own sections that make it up, like browser and creation window and properties window. A lot of these things have that. UV editor has its own set of things that pop up. If you go to window, you could always find the different pieces and put it back together. The only one I use is browser, but these other pieces could be added. If you wanted to, you could put the UV editor in the Hypershade. I wouldn't do it, but I guess you could. You can even put you could put the viewport in the Hypershade. That'd be crazy. It should show. I'm trying to think why you wouldn't see it. What you may want to do, Annie, what I'm thinking about is, so I'm doing it right now and it's not showing up. I wonder if it's here in your Hypershade and it's hidden somewhere and you're like collapsed really small. Let's see if I can do it where it's like not. It's so tiny you can't see it because it might think it's actually open and it's just collapsed down real weird. I don't know if there's a way to reset it. Yeah, that's actually a good question, actually. Maybe do a test and see if some of these other ones pop up. Like if you do property editor, does that appear? Is it just the browser that doesn't show up? If none of these show up, then we might have a bigger problem where your Hypershade has just got some type of bug going on. If that's the case, you could just try closing out of Maya and reopening it. But thankfully, even if the browser doesn't appear, it's actually kind of nice because that thing I was showing you earlier with doing a search, and if your case, if you haven't named anything, if you do a search with DAG objects only off and you look for Pixar Surface, you'll find all the Pixar Surface materials. That might be your way to do it. I don't know if you can, actually, I don't know if you can right click on them though to assign it. I haven't tried that through the outliner. Oh, it does. Yeah, that's actually kind of, I didn't know that. So if you have it selected, if you right click and do assign material to selection, you actually still could put that material on whatever you wanted, even through the outliner. That's really cool. I have never tried doing it this way. I'm learning things today with you guys. If you want to, what you can do, Annie, is just like you can record it and show me like a little video of what you're seeing, and I can take a look at it and try to get back to you with more info. But hopefully we can get that figured out. So I'm going to keep moving forward with the lecture, and I'll try to get back to you on that. So I have it connected, and if I do a render, you can see that nothing's happening. It's because the file node, what I'm going to do is click on it, and when the material loads up, hit that little input button. This is going to take you to the file node that's going into the material. We're going to hit that folder, and I'm going to go into pedestal textures, and then we're going to click on pedestal texture. We're going to open it, give it a second. You can see a little weird thing showed up where it's like blue. That's clearly not what we need. And then what it's going to do is in a little bit, you should see this little message pop up. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's basically telling you that it converted your texture to a .text format. So if I go back in that folder, something else just appeared. This, oh geez, I don't want to open it. No, there we go. This is the .text format. This is the PNG. RenderMan wants to use a .text for its final renders. It's a little more efficient for memory. Basically, the main idea is when you save this out, RenderMan is going to convert every texture you make into this .text. And there's a little bit of a delay sometimes when you first connect a new texture where it's trying to convert it over, especially if you hit render and there's dozens of texture files that you haven't done this to yet. So it might take a minute or two, but this did pop up pretty quick. You can tell it's loading. So really the only thing I need to do, it actually looks kind of cool, is I'd maybe darken it with the gain. I'm going to do a crop and just draw. Actually, you know what? Let me get a better camera angle because I can't really see it from this distance. We're going to get in here with perspective. Let's do that. There we go. There's nothing wrong with just jumping in there with a closer camera. Nice. All right, let's do a crop. So I'm going to hit that crop button. I'm just going to marquee drag over this. And I'm going to turn off selection highlighting just for a second so I don't have that thing lighting up. It just helps me see what the hell's going on, and I can still click on things. So if I click on the balcony, it shows up, but I'm not seeing the little the highlight. And I'm going to bring down the gain because I want you guys to see I'm just basically darkening how that texture reacts with light. So if it's up really high, you may notice some of your textures look like they're blown out, and that's just because the light in the scene is very bright. So I think you might want to bring this down a little bit. Just do it until it feels balanced. There's not really any magical number. You just have to kind of use your eye and your best judgment. Oh, I'm seeing my stream is pinwheeling. Oh. I don't know if that stream just went offline for you guys, but it looked like on my end it just kind of freaked out for a second. Once I have the texture connected and it looks good with the right intensity, when you go down to primary spec, so what you do with spec is you're going to bring up face color a little bit and bring up edge color about halfway. Now watch what happens if I crank this up too high. It looks like it's getting brighter, and I want to show you what this is. You guys remember what a specular reflection is versus a diffuse reflection? Let me take the diffuse gain down, which is going to get rid of the texture. What is this thing that's left over that we're seeing? That's not the texture. That is the specular reflection. And you can see it's reflecting the post, it's reflecting the telescope is in here. I think some of these lines actually might be the post behind the camera on the other side of the balcony. And what I could do, if you wanted to, you actually could kill the gain just so you can see what the specular reflection looks like by itself. And you could make a judgment call on like, all right, how rough do I think this should be? I know it looks kind of like a metal, but if I use the roughness, I could have it be very polished, very sharp, right? See how clean that is? You can see every post. Or is it a much rougher stone where it's a lot drier and diffused and you're not really supposed to be able to see perfect reflections in it? So I might do this. And I'm going to pull this back down again because I actually don't want it that bright. That's kind of ridiculous. There we go. Very dry, subtle highlight. Okay. Now I'm going to keep this gain off for a second so there's no texture at the moment. And I'm going to come down to clear coat. And with the clear coat, this is going to allow us to put a polish on top of that stone's specular reflection. Very similar to the car paint. So if I go and do the same thing, I'm going to boost this up a little bit. Bring up this edge color, and you can see that like overlap where there's like a crisp reflection, but that dry one's behind it. Now with the polish, I might do a roughness of like 0.2. So it's a little softer, but it's not nearly as soft as this. So I'm creating a layered effect, and now I'm going to take this gain and bring back that texture. And since I kind of do want those highlights to show up, I actually might decide to leave this pretty low. So a darker texture might allow these other specular reflections to show up just based on the contrast of it. And if it's darker too, you might be able to get away with pushing some of these reflection values a little farther than you normally would. All right, so there we go, a little bit of a reflection on the underside there. That looks pretty good. So we'll go back to render cam and just take a look at that. All right, there we go. That's looking pretty good. It'll look better too. I know it's very similar to the gray, but once we start adding other color around it with the wall and the balcony, this will probably pop a little bit more. I do want to do one thing real quick. I know we're at 9 o'clock. I'm going to keep going. If you guys feel like you need to take off to work on an activity or do other stuff, don't feel like you need to hang out. For the recording, though, I do want to do a couple things here with the balcony post because I kind of wanted to assign materials to different UV shells so you could see that. I might do that real quick. I'm going to copy a couple textures over from my final version so you can see this. Let's do balcony textures. All right, give me 1 second. We're going to skip past some Photoshop stuff. I want to show you how to assign my textures. Oh boy, my computer just had a meltdown there for a second. Holy crap. Thought we were about to lose everything. Okay, let's find my final product. Okay, pedestal. Nope, not pedestal, sorry. Balcony. Okay, now this is from 2.2. I'm going to grab this, the normal map. I think that's all I need actually for this. We're going to go to pedestal texture. Sorry, not pedestal. I keep doing that. Balcony. We'll put those in there. The PSD should be in here too, but it's fine. All right, I'm going to put this material on a few different pieces here. I'm going to do selection highlighting back on. I can't see anything. There we go. Okay, what I'm doing is hitting the up arrow. So I'm going to click on this and do up, up. I'm going up to the group. Here's balcony group. This is everything. I'm going to assign a new material for the balcony to all this stuff. So with the group selected, we're going to make a new Pixar surface. We're going to call this balcony material. All right, so get the balcony material. We're going to go to the color file. I'm not even going to render it. We're just going to get stuff connected. File node, folder, back up, go to the balcony textures, balcony texture, open. All right, we're good. Click back here, go back to the material. I'm going to get a few very basic specular properties set up. I'm not even going to render it, but I just know that I need to do this every time. And I'm going to put the roughness right in the middle and just see what it looks like, and I'll change it later. We're not going to do a clear coat for this because I kind of want this to feel drier. And let's do the normal map real quick. We haven't done that yet. So the normal map, let's go into Hypershade. Excuse me. If you need to graph the material, so graphing a material, and I'll do this through here as well, just in case for some reason we can't see it. Let's do material. There we go. Here it is. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do I'm going to try to do an open in Hypershade. I think I should put it down here. No, maybe not. I was hoping I could graph through here, but I think if you select it here or at the top and you hit this thing right here, it should graph the material out. Oh, jeez. Holy, what just happened to that? Oh, wow, it just blew my, let me do that again. Clear graph. That just didn't go well. Okay, there we go. Yeah, the Hypershade just had a meltdown there. When you graph the material out, there's the material. That's the texture I connected. I'm going to make the normal map connection too. So the normal map is a little different. I know I didn't go over how to do it in Photoshop, but if you just watch the video in 2.2, it's super easy. The normal map is going to give the balcony some bumpiness. So to do this, we need a different type of node, and we're going to make that right in the Hypershade. Whereas it's a RenderMan node. We're going to use tab. I'm going to type in PXR. So PXR is just the prefix for basically everything Pixar related. PXR normal, and you'll see we have Pixar normal map. Click, there it is. So the tab is a way to search through all sorts of stuff in the Hypershade. Now the normal map node is very similar to a file node. You're basically just loading in a texture. It does a bunch of other stuff aside from that help the normal map look good, but that's essentially what it is. Now the one weird thing about this is how you connect the normal map to the material. And I'm going to show you guys how to do it through the connections right here. Normally when you connect stuff, it's very simple because you can just say out color to the material properties attribute. Like this would go to specular face color. I could take this to the subsurface color. The problem with the normal map is the output isn't always visible. Now, if you click on the node and on my keyboard, I'm going to hit 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want you to see this again. Let me actually get rid of the browser so I can make this a little bit bigger. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 1, 2, 3, 4 keys, which are also these right here, are collapsing and expanding different attributes that relate to the node. The 4-1, or sorry, not 4, 3 is actually really good because what 3 is going to do is it's going to show you every single attribute on the Pixar normal map. We need that guy right there, result n. Result n means take the result of the normals and connect that to something. Result n, now when I go over here, we're going to connect to the only thing that's lighting up, which is bump normal. Click. And I want to show you where that connected, because if you go to the material, go down to globals, this is where we just connected it. So it's all lit up. If before I did that, this was not all bright. This is a new connection. So result into that. Now, when you hit 3 to show the connections, if you hit 4, it's going to look like it's hidden. It's just hiding it. Well, it is hidden, I guess. But it's hiding it, so it looks back, at its normal state. 4 is default. 1 is very tiny. 3 is very big, and 2 is kind of, I think, just whatever is connected. But that'll take a little bit of time to get used to. You guys will get the hang of it. Okay, it's there. We're going to go here, go to the folder, and I'm going to pick the normal map. Okay, now it's doing textures by default. I need to change this to images so I can see it. We're going to do balcony normal texture. This is a little annoying. It defaults to the wrong format. We're going to hit open. And I think it's already on here. Yeah, it should be. So I bet we're going to get something. I'm just going to put the camera here and see if we can see it. Let's actually render from the render cam. This whole bottom part should be showing me something. Now, yeah, see, it just kind of clicked. So right now it's just running through the process of converting all these textures over to that .text format. And we're going to use crop, and I'll just draw through this one area right here. It's working. I'm actually going to get a little bit closer with the camera with like my perspective because it's really hard to see what's going on here. Let's do this. There's nothing wrong with you guys just doing renders from other angles so you can better see what's going on here. That's working. Oh, that is bumpy. It's real. That normal map is almost working too well. So it's really bumpy. We're going to tone that back. So the normal map, let's just go in here, and you're going to take the bump scale at the top and just lower that down closer to 0. It's 0 to 1. So if you go negative, it'll flip it, but just do like 0.5. Okay, I'm just going to look at how bumpy it is. That's still really bumpy. Let's do 0.25. Now, if you go to 0, it'll look smooth, so you guys can see that. We do a crop because I know it's kind of hard to see what's going on. It's taking a bit. Yeah, see how smooth that is? That's because the normal map's not doing anything. But even at 0.2, you'll notice like you get these little tiny bumps there. Just use your best judgments, kind of see how far you want to push that stuff. I might do like 0.35 or something, and we'll say it's good. Sure, that looks pretty good. Actually, it doesn't look bad even now. Now, the one thing I want to show you guys real quick is how to duplicate this so you can make a colored version for the different parts of the post. So we're going to do that real fast. What we're going to do is, first off, let me save the scene just in case things get weird here. Okay, we're going to save it. And what I'm going to do now is make a duplicate. So I'm hoping it pulls the shading group node with it. Sometimes this doesn't work too well. But we're going to click on the material at the top. We're going to do Edit, Duplicate, Shading Network. Please take the shading group. Okay, it didn't. Where is it? There's the file. It kind of overlaps everything. It's a copy of almost everything. It just didn't do this guy, which is kind of an issue. And I want to test to see if I can assign this at all. So I'm just going to grab something random in another place. I need to make sure this can assign to something, because occasionally we have a problem with this. I'm just going to click on this random little shelf over here. Oh, good. Okay, so by me doing that, see how it just created the shading group automatically? That's what I was hoping was going to happen. There's a little bit of a bug sometimes, where if you assign a shader that doesn't have this on it, it starts throwing errors that it can't. What's it called again? Error while parsing arguments, I think. But we got it. I'm going to put this back to the default real quick because I don't actually want that on there. Where's our default? Doesn't really matter because you can't see that anyway. There we go. Okay. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. I'm going to put this on just one piece so you can kind of see this. Let's actually do it on this guy. I'm going to put this new material. Let's actually call this something different so I don't get mixed up. Let's do balcony paint material. And I'm going to put it on just that one guy. So there it is. It's there. It's black. Don't worry about that. The render is going to be fine. There's a weird connection going on in the shading group. It's still going to look okay. Okay, so it's there. Now the reason I'm doing this is because if I go to the texture, and if you come down to color balance and you start messing with the color gain and offset, you can actually recolor this thing. I show a couple other ways to do it with utility nodes like a Remap Hsv. I'm going to go to color gain. Let's do like a really cool, like a deep dark greenish color, like a teal almost. We're going to saturate it. So I'm multiplying, gain is a multiplier. It's multiplying that green, like a seafoam green color, against the texture. This is very similar to you making this color in Photoshop on a layer and setting the blend mode to multiply. That's what's happening right here. And I'm going to go there, and I might just darken that a little bit. There we go. So I have a painted version or a tinted version of that same texture. So you might be wondering why I did that. I will show you. We're going to click on the material, and I'm going to put the other one back on there again. Boop. We're going to put that back. Okay, so this is set up and good to go. I just put that on that one post so I could see it really easily. Now I'm going to assign that to all these different pieces that make up the post. So we're going to do this in sections here. Let's start with these 5 actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to go into the UV editor. Here's what it looks like. And we are going to assign them to the chunks. And I broke this up intentionally. So if you look at the shell, they're in little strips, so you can pick which pieces in here you want to give the little painted color. It's a really cool way just to break that up so it looks a little bit more ornate. So we're going to do, just like the documentation, I'm going to drag through all of this. We're going to do shift click through this piece here. I think I'm doing this right. Yep. And then I think it's just the base. Yeah, those are our pieces right there. I think that's what I have in the documentation. So when you select all those little shells, come over here, right mouse button over your material, assign material to viewport selection. Okay. I don't know why the texture popped up. We're just going to turn that little image off so I don't see it. Okay. And you just would repeat that over and over again. Now the reason we're doing it, I'll show you, is because now, actually you can it's kind of cool, even though that shading group is doing a weird thing where it's rendering black in the viewport. If you do a render, you'll see why we did this. We now have that same texture being reused on two materials. One is just sort of in its an original format, and we have a duplicate material that we did pretty quick where it's going to different pieces of that object's UVs, and then I'm doing a color gain adjustment on that file node. So this, let me close out of this for a second. This file node just has no adjustment. The duplicate is the one I'm putting that little tint on it, and this is of course applied to those random pieces right there. This is kind of a fun way to just so you understand that when you bring textures in Maya, that's not always the end of everything. It's like, well, we hope it looks good, we hope it's the right color. There are ways in the Hypershade to sort of do somewhat minor adjustments to make it richer, make it darker, break up the color by multiplying something on it. And it gets way more complicated too because there's all these other things we haven't talked about called layered textures, there's layered shaders. The Hypershade can work like Photoshop where you actually can physically stack different images together and blend them with alphas. That's something you're going to learn way later, much too complicated for today. But this is kind of the first time you're just seeing this stuff. But it's pretty cool though. There we go. So we went over by about a good 15 minutes. So I do appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Does anybody have any questions before we decide to call the meeting? If not, hope everybody has a good night. And I will, I'm sure, catch up and talk with you guys either tomorrow or over the weekend, or maybe on Monday. If that's the case, enjoy your weekend. All right. I will talk to you all later.